Hey everybody. Today I want to talk a little bit about Roman religion, and then we're going to talk about the rise of Christianity. So if you want to follow along, just open up the Roman religion and Christianity PDF files. So I'll do kind of Roman religion first, and it'll be pretty quick. Okay, so um, to kind of understand Roman religion is based on paganism. Pagan deities were in charge of natural forces. Pagan deities were associated with human endeavors, things such as war, birth of children, the harvest. So basically, what you kind of learned about the Greeks also applies to the Romans. All the Greek gods were represented in the Roman world, just with different names. Um, so they changed the names up once they became Roman gods. Romans worship lots of gods and goddesses, uh, goddesses, sorry, Jupiter, the sky god, Venus, the god of love, sexual love, Neptune, the god of the sea, Mars, the god of war. There's minor deities as well. There's this god named Consus who stores grains. There's the god Flora, who's the god of fruits and crops. So there's all kinds of gods and goddesses in the Roman world. Um, the Romans had gods for major things and minor things. They had gods of the doorway. So, like the doorway of a house had four deities. One of them was Janus. There's even a god who's in charge of mold and rust. So, like when things are corrupted or corroded by like rust, there was a kind of a spiritual explanation for that, I guess you could say. So the Romans have gods for all kinds of things. Um, Roman gods have human characteristics, emotions, motivations, just like the Greek gods did, because, like I said, they're often the same thing. So Roman gods are male and female. They have anger issues. They lust after each other. They are arrogant at times. They're capable of having feelings of happiness. Roman gods would occupy temples. And Roman gods and goddesses demand respect and recognition. How do you show respect to the gods as a Roman citizen? Well, you build them temples, you build them shrines, you have festivals dedicated to them, you remember them every year when you celebrate their festival, stuff like that. And Romans placed a big emphasis on ritual. And this is a lot different than maybe like Christianity, which we'll talk about next. Romans didn't really care what you privately thought about a god or a goddess. You might think Mars is a terrible god. You could care less about, the origins of him. There's not, you don't argue. You can argue about what kind of god he is, whatever. But you need to celebrate his public festivals in public. You need to go about things the right way. Um, so privately, you can think whatever you want, but publicly, you need to kind of be a team player, I guess you could say. Um, you know, correct Roman worship placates the god. It turns away their anger, and it wins their approval or their favor. In the book Livy that you read a lot of stories from, there's an example. I don't remember the name of the festival, but the Romans are celebrating the festival, and like on the third day, somebody has a dream or a vision that the gods are angry because they didn't start the festival correctly. Like they didn't read the right words, or they didn't pronounce them the right way. So basically, a bunch of calamities happen. The guy that had the vision doesn't tell anyone, and I think some of his family members die. And the gods are basically like, "Hey, it's important you worship us in the correct manner, in the correct ritual. It's not what's in your heart; it's kind of the outward appearance. So, make sure this gets fixed." And then he tells the Roman emperor, and they halt the games and the festivals, and they start everything over, and then they do the ceremony the right way. So it's important how you do this. Um, and the goal of worship, you could say, is to kind of have a peace with the gods, a pax deorum. If you do your part, the gods will do their part, and you'll be at peace. There's prayer. You could pray as a Roman to the gods or the goddesses. There's sacrifices. In Livy, there's all kinds of stories about sacrificing an animal Or before a major battle, a Roman general might say, I'm going to sacrifice 200, bulls to the god of war if you make me victorious. And then the story goes they win the battle, so there'll be a huge sacrifice afterwards. Divination is another big part of Roman religion. You search out what the gods think about certain issues. Should we go to war? Should we establish a colony? Stuff like that. There's divination where you examine the entrails of animals. There's divination where you observe birds, the way they fly around. There's even a story in Livy about some chickens. I think this is in the later Roman Empire, but they're called not divine chickens, but they have some type of spiritual component where, depending on how they run around and eat their food, that's communication from the gods. So there's all kinds of stories about that. There's divination where you look for signs in the skies from the gods. So, if you heard voices, if you saw a comet, maybe if a volcano erupts. Sometimes you hear weird stories about animals being born with, 2 heads or, 3 legs instead of 4, stuff like that, or conjoined animals, stuff like that. The Romans saw as messages from the gods. In Rome, you would have a chief priest, the Pontifex Maximus. They would keep records of all the signs from the gods in the Sibylline books. These were supposedly purchased by Tarquin the Proud, and they're just a collection of oracles. So basically, if the Romans didn't understand something, they'd open up the books and they would be like, well, what's it say about this? And then they would supposedly find an oracle about it. So that stuff goes on. So for the Romans, their religion is more about public observance of the state gods than their personal faith in the gods. In a lot of writings, you don't really see people commenting on their personal feelings about the god. It's more for public observances. So that's really important to remember. So that's kind of just Roman religion real quick. I've never studied Roman religion in depth, so I'm kind of just giving you a real quick overview of it. But now I want to talk a little bit about Christianity. So let me get my slideshow up. Okay, so we'll talk about Christianity and Islam coming up because those are the 2 religions that I guess play the biggest role in European history. And some of this is my slideshows from when I taught the world religions class for Barton. And I always kind of give a disclaimer. I've researched this stuff a lot. I've read tons of books. I've read the Bible and the Quran, trying to kind of piece together what I think is the main views of these religions. So religion can be kind of a contentious thing, so I'm not ever meaning to offend anybody. I'm doing my best to present kind of what I think are their main beliefs. So if you ever feel like getting anything wrong, I always told my face-to-face classes this, feel free to email me or kind of show me hey, you said this, but here's a passage where it kind of says the opposite. I'm always open to people kind of telling me their opinion, so feel free to do that if you think I got something wrong on that, but that's kind of my disclaimer. So we'll talk about Islam later when I think in the next module. This module, it's Christianity. So if you look at slide 3, you can kind of see how that's a map of the Roman Empire. And then the next slide is the spread of Christianity. Christianity basically spreads throughout the Roman Empire. You could kind of say the Roman Empire is like a conduit for the spread of Christianity. You've got the Roman peace. You've got roads throughout the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is kind of united by the common Greek language. A lot of people, intellectuals throughout the empire, speak Greek, so it was easy for ideas to flow. So the empire is kind of a conduit for Christianity. So if you look at slide 4, you see the spread of Christianity. If you look at slide 5, you see the spread of Islam. Basically, Islam spreads from the Arabian Peninsula to where Persia is, to northern Africa, to Spain. It doesn't really ever get a strong grip over Europe. We'll talk about that, but if you look around the Black Sea where Constantinople is, Constantinople was a very hard city to bypass, so Islam can't get past that until the 1450s, and they conquer Spain, but there's a big battle of Poitiers, which we'll talk about later, in France. That is a defeat for the Muslims, and they don't spread any farther into Europe. So that's kind of the extent of the spread of Islam. Okay, so Christianity starts in the province of Judea. If you look at slide 6, that shows you where that's at. It was declared a province. So Christianity revolves around the person of Jesus. Jesus is born in Bethlehem during the reign of Augustus. He preached his message, and he was crucified during the reign of Tiberius. He was raised in the town of Nazareth. Kind of his central message was repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. He had 12 disciples. He had more disciples, but he had 12 main ones. According to Christianity, he was crucified on the cross, raised from the dead, sits at the right hand of God, and he's coming back someday to judge humanity. And if you look at slide 8, 9, and 10, I've kind of got this little graphic, I guess you could say. These are the different views about, I guess you could say, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So if you look at slide 8, Abraham is kind of the founder, or he's, I guess, what you could say Christians, Jews, and Muslims look to. Abraham was declared righteous by God, so he's kind of, I guess you could say, the father of kind of these three religions, and they argue in a way. That's an oversimplification, but so the Christian view is that you have this old religion, Judaism, which, you have Abraham, you have his descendants, you have Moses, you have King David. You have the Jewish religion, which is the Old Testament, the Christian Bible, the Old Testament, and the Jewish Bible. And then Jesus came along and fulfilled all the prophecies that the Jews had in their Bible. So the Jewish Bible talks about how someday there will be a Messiah that will come to earth. Christians believe that Jesus was that Messiah, and he fulfilled all the old prophecies. So that's kind of slide 8. You have Judaism, Jesus comes along, and then we kind of call Judaism Christianity. Now, the Jewish view is that, so if you're a follower of Orthodox Judaism, Jesus did not fulfill the prophecies. Jesus was not the Messiah. So from the Jewish point of view, Judaism is this constant, strain. Think of it as linear. And Christianity is an offshoot, and it misses the mark. It's not the true religion because Jesus is not the Messiah. That's kind of the Jewish version. And then the Islamic version is that, Abraham was Muslim, and Judaism and Christianity totally missed the mark. So they've corrupted the true religion, and Muhammad was the last prophet of Allah, and he came and through the Quran kind of brought back the true message. Islam teaches that God sent down the Torah, the Jewish Bible, and the Christian Gospels, so the Christian Bible, but Jews and Christians corrupted it, so the Jewish and Christian Bibles don't really say what they originally said, and the Quran is the true Word of God. That's kind of the Muslim version. So that's kind of how those three religions differ, I guess you could say. That's kind of really simple and quick, but that's kind of the big picture, I guess you could say. And if you look at slide 11, here's an Old Testament, a Jewish Bible prophecy. Isaiah 7:14, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son, and he will be called Emmanuel. Christians say, look, this is a prophecy that applies to Jesus. Jews say, no, this is a prophecy that does not apply to Jesus. So Christians and Jews kind of look at Old Testament prophecies and say, does that apply to Jesus or not? And they obviously have different views. So that's kind of just, I guess, quick summary. Okay, so Jesus taught in parables. I'm on slide 13. He would always have these little neat stories he would use to kind of teach a bigger meaning. So parables are the way Jesus teaches. He teaches that the two greatest commandments are to love God with all your heart and to love your neighbor as yourself. He says that sums up all the Old Testament Jewish prophets. One of his most famous kind of sermons is called the Sermon on the Mount. He basically gives this sermon to a crowd of people on the side of a hill, And he says things like, in the Old Testament, he doesn't say Old Testament, but he says, you heard it was said, you shall not murder. That's the Old Testament version. That's kind of the Ten Commandments, Judaism. He says, I tell you, don't be angry. He says, you should not commit adultery. That's the Ten Commandments. I tell you, don't even lust after a woman. Don't even have adulterous thoughts in your heart. Um, you heard that it was said an eye for an eye. That's kind of old Jewish law. He says, turn the other cheek if somebody hits you on the cheek. So in a way, Jesus is kind of, I guess you could say, making it more difficult to follow God in a certain way. Because if you think about it, most people have never murdered. Most people haven't committed adultery, like literally cheated on their spouse. Most people haven't been in the position where they can actually take vengeance and kill someone to pay them back for a wrong they've done. So murder, adultery, vengeance, most people haven't actually done those things. But pretty much everyone has had anger in their heart at one time or lust in their heart. Um, so those things people are all guilty of. Not everyone's a murderer, but everyone's guilty of anger. So in that way, Jesus is kind of saying, like, it's going to be harder to follow God, to do the right thing. Now later on, he kind of, through his sacrifice of dying on the cross, he says he takes that all away. But that's kind of how you kind of look at it. He also says, don't do your acts of righteousness for all men to see. Don't go outside and pray so that everyone sees how holy you are. Don't give to the needy in public so everyone sees what a great guy you are or a great gal you are. God knows what's in your heart. He says, do your deeds of righteousness in private. That way only God knows, your good deeds. You're not boasting about how great a person you are. He constantly talked about laying up treasures in heaven. So do things that matter in the long term, in eternity. He had a lot of famous parables. There's a parable of the prodigal son. Basically, there's a father and two sons. The father represents God. The young son represents sinners, and the older son represents kind of the religious person. So this father, his younger son, the sinner, comes to him and says, Dad, I want you to give me my inheritance. I want to get out of here. And usually the inheritance wasn't handed out until the father was dead. So basically the young son is saying, give me my money now as if you were dead. Well, the father does this. He goes off to another land. The son does, the youngest son, and he spends his money on, wild living, prostitutes, gambling, all kinds of stuff. And he loses all his money. And then he realizes he's hungry because he doesn't have money. He ends up feeding pigs, which to Jews was considered a dirty animal. And this young son says, I'm going to go back to my father and ask for forgiveness, and hopefully he'll take me back and let me be like a servant to him. I'm not his son anymore. I'll be a servant. Well, when he goes back, he repents, and the dad is so happy to see the son. He says, I'm so happy you're back. Let's have a celebration. Let's have a barbecue. They kill the fattened cow or calf. They throw a party. So basically, the moral of the story is when a sinner repents and turns to God, God is very happy. Like, that's what he wants. There's also another part of the story where the older son, who's kind of represents the religious person, he's like, hey, Dad, I never asked for my inheritance. I never ran off and squandered it. Why don't you throw me a party? Why aren't you celebrating me? And God, the Father, basically says, I appreciate that you don't turn your back on me, that you follow the rules, but we really need to celebrate because your son was lost and now he's found. So that's kind of the moral of the story. There's a parable of the lost sheep. He says a shepherd has 100 sheep and he loses one of them, so he leaves the 99 sheep there just to go look for the one sheep, and when he finds that sheep, he's really happy. That's just the point that God chases after sinners. There's a parable of the unmerciful servant. Basically, there's a king, and he has two servants, or he has one servant, and he says, pay me back the money you owe. And it's a huge amount, like, $10 million. And the servant says, I don't have the money to pay you back. So the king says, I'm going to throw you in jail, sell your kid, sell your wife. And the servant pleads with him and says, please let me pay you back, just give me some time. So the king forgives his $10 million debt. Well, that servant goes out to some guy who owed him like $1,000, a much smaller amount, and he says, "Pay me back what you owe me." And that guy says, "I don't have the money right now, but I'll get it to you." Well, this servant throws that guy in jail for the $1,000 he owes him, while the king had forgiven him the $10 million. And it's not, they don't say the amount of money, but it's huge. They do, but I don't know the equivalents back then, so I'm just making it up. But basically, the king hears about this and he says, "I forgave you, you should forgive others." And that's kind of a parable. If you're a sinner, God has forgiven you. So when someone sins against you, you need to forgive them. There's also a similar story about a woman caught in adultery. The religious leaders, bring this woman to Jesus, and they say, "This woman was caught in adultery. The punishment is death. We're going to stone her." And Jesus says, "If none of you have sinned, go ahead and stone her, put her to death." And all the religious leaders kind of look sheepish because they know they've all sinned before, so they kind of walk away. And Jesus basically says, "Where are the men who are condemning you? Have they all left?" And the woman says, "Yes." And Jesus says something to the effect of, I don't condemn you, so stop your sinful life, don't commit adultery anymore," and kind of leave. The Good Samaritan's another famous parable. Basically, there's this person who's hurt alongside the road, and a couple priests walk by him and don't help him, but then a Samaritan the Jews and the Samaritans don't get along, so this Jewish guy's hurt along the road. Some of his own people have passed by him, but the Samaritan, who's considered his enemy, sees him and takes pity on him. So basically, you need to love your enemies. There's another parable about what makes a person clean. Jesus talks about how think of cleanliness before God as like a cup. If you polish the outside, but you're real dirty on the inside, you're not really a true follower of God. But if you're clean on the inside and the outside, then you're a follower of God. There's a lot of passages in the New Testament where Jesus claims basically to be God or to have divinity. One of the stories about how Jesus does miracles and heals people. Some men bring a paralytic to Jesus, and Jesus tells this paralytic, "Your sins are forgiven." Well, only God can forgive sins. So a lot of times you have Jesus basically claiming to do something that only in the Jewish context, only God is able to do. So some people start saying like, "Hey, this fellow's he's blaspheming." And that was basically making yourself out to be God. And Jesus says, what's easier to do, to tell someone their sins are forgiven or to physically heal them? But he says, so that you will know the Son of Man has authority to forgive sins, he tells the paralytic to be healed, get up and walk, and the paralytic does in the story in the New Testament. So basically, Jesus is claiming divinity. Jesus often talked about God as his Father. He says, "My Father, whom you claim as your God, is the one who glorifies me. Though you do not know him, I know him. If I said I did not, I would be a liar like you." He says, "Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day." Then the religious leaders are like, "You're not even 50 years old, Jesus. How can you say you've seen Abraham?" And then Jesus says, "Before Abraham was born, I am." So basically, Jesus has existed for eternity's past. Other places he says, "I and the Father are one." At one point, he asked the religious leaders, "Why do you want to kill me? Why are you going to stone me to death?" And they said, "We're not stoning you because of your good works. We're stoning you because you say that you're God," basically. And there's other times where Jesus said, "I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end." Well, that's an Old Testament phrase. It wouldn't have said Alpha and Omega because that's Greek letters, but the Old Testament says that God is the beginning and the end, and Jesus says that. There's other times where Jesus says, or the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures would say only God can forgive, and Jesus will say, "I can forgive sins." There's in the Jewish scriptures it says, God is truth, and Jesus says, "I am the truth." The Jewish scriptures, the Christian Old Testament says only God can raise the dead, and the Christian New Testament claims that Jesus raised people from the dead. So there's all kinds of points where Jesus makes himself out He says that he is God, even though he doesn't say it directly. Everybody back then would have known that he's claiming to be God. If you look at slide 27, the early church after Jesus was executed comes from this word ecclesia. It just means called out from the world. So like if you're a follower of Jesus, you're in the world, but you're not really in it. Your goal is to kind of have an otherworldly fixation of your mind. That's one reason why Edward Gibbons, the English historian, said that Christianity kind of helped kill the Roman Empire. You've got all these Christians focusing on otherworldly beliefs or kind of judgment someday, like when they'll go to heaven. That doesn't really help you run an empire when the barbarians are crossing the borders from Germany. Christianity is a religion of exclusivity because it claims to be the only way to know God. Acts, which is one of the books of the New Testament, it says salvation is found in no one else, for there's no other name under heaven through which humankind can be saved. Christianity is also a missionary religion. Jesus, before he ascends into heaven, after he dies, is buried for 3 days and rises from the dead. He tells his followers to go make disciples of the other nations, so baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Probably the person that spread Christianity the most is this person named Paul. Now, he was originally known as Saul. He was a Jewish leader, a very religious man, and he was at first going around and persecuting Christians because at first a lot of people thought Christianity was just an offshoot of Judaism. It's just this kind of weird sect, and we need to kind of squish it. Well, the story goes in the New Testament that Paul was going to Damascus to persecute the Christians, and he had a vision from God. Jesus said, "Why are you persecuting me?" And Paul doesn't know what's going on. And from that point on, Jesus told Paul, like, "I'm going to use you to spread my message." So Paul shows up in Damascus, and everyone's kind of fearful of him, but then he says he's converted to Christianity. And at first, nobody believed him because they're kind of like, this guy's been arresting us. Now he's going to spread our message. But Paul, if you look at slide 31, basically spread Christianity throughout, Asia Minor, Greece. He eventually makes it to Rome. So he spread Christianity throughout the known Roman world. And Paul is basically where you get a lot of the theological, definitions, I guess you could say, of Christianity. So if you look at slide 32, there's a couple passages. Romans is one of the most famous New Testament books. It claims that everyone has sinned, everyone has fallen short. There's nobody that's righteous. And Romans 6:23 is kind of when I taught the religions class, this is the verse I use to kind of sum up Christianity, I guess. For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus. So, if you've sinned, you deserve death. And that's basically a natural death. You die. The human body is frail. But because of Jesus dying on the cross, you have the gift of eternal life. So that's kind of how you describe, I guess, the main message of Christianity. And just to convert to Christianity, you just have to confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. So that's kind of the main message, I guess you could say, of Christianity. Like I said, Jesus had 12 apostles or 12 disciples. There's some, it doesn't say how they all died in the Bible. What we have are early church fathers. They're called church fathers because they're the early writers of kind of Christianity. But in the maybe second and third centuries, so the 100s and the 200s, you have church historians, church fathers writing down the way that they've heard it, that the apostles died. So some of these, they're pretty sure they know what happened. Like Peter was crucified in Rome. That's pretty definitive. But there's some other disciples who there's maybe a church father will be like, I heard he was killed in this country in Britain, but someone else said he died over here. So not all of these are definitive, but basically all the disciples of Jesus died spreading the message of Christianity. The only exception was Judas, who betrayed Jesus before he was crucified. But basically, all the disciples died a death spreading the message of Jesus. And the disciple John, he died of old age, but all the others died a violent death in one way or another, spreading Christianity. How did Christianity spread? This is something that historians have debated a long time. If you look at slide 39, I got kind of a list of some of the stuff. So, like I said, Christianity is a missionary religion. So Jesus said, spread my message. So if you're going to be a true follower of Jesus, like the disciples, that's what they did. The Roman Empire, you had a common language throughout the Roman Empire. You had the Roman roads. You had the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. So basically, ideas could spread. It was a good time to spread ideas because of the Roman Empire. Um, One of the church fathers, there was this guy named Tertullian. He said the blood of martyrs is the seeds of the church. So basically, if you try to persecute an idea and squash it, it's going to spread more. Um, some people have argued that the message of Christianity is pretty powerful. It promises afterlife, forgiveness of your sins. Some the Roman world could be pretty brutal in some ways, so some people use that. Um, Philanthropy, Christianity reached out to the poor. There was Roman practices of leaving infants to die. The Greeks did this too. Christians would put a stop to this. The gladiator games. Rome was very violent, a very violent place. Christians eventually put an end to the gladiator games because they just thought it was too crazy. Some historians have argued that this period was something called the Age of Anxiety. Remember how we talked about how crazy it was in the 3rd century for the Roman Empire? You have so many emperors being killed, civil wars. They have argued that people wanted a new religion. Another few explanations, Christianity is free. The church is well organized. They have a hierarchy that helps spread it. So these are all different explanations. And historians don't agree on the reasons that Christianity spread, but these are just some of them I've read in different books. Christian persecution by the Romans. The Romans persecuted Christianity, but they didn't do it the exact same all the time, and it's kind of sporadic. Roman officials saw Christianity as threatening the political and social order. The Romans have lots of gods, and when they would win a war, they would co-opt the gods of those people they defeated. So they don't have a problem that Christianity added another god. They just are mad that Christians refuse to recognize the Roman gods. So if you think about it, the Romans had this, peace with the gods. We practice rituals the right way, and the gods protect our empire. If Christians refuse to recognize the Roman God, that's going to break that peace with the God. So that's what the Romans are worried about. Christians met in secret. There's all kinds of rumors throughout the Roman Empire. This isn't just hearsay. This is, there are actual documents where Roman officials will say Christians engage in cannibalism and incestuous orgies. And that's because in the New Testament it talks about drinking communion and eating the bread of Jesus' body. It's basically remembering his crucifixion. But when you read it, it says, drink the blood, eat the body. Some people thought when these Christians met in secret, that's really what they were doing. That's not what they were doing, but rumors spread. So there's different persecutions. In AD 64, when we had the Great Fire of Rome, Nero blames the persecution or blames a Christian and persecutes them. There was an emperor named Decius. He persecutes the Christians. He required them to offer a sacrifice to the Roman gods. You would get a certificate or a receipt that said you made your you would burn incense, so you worshiped the Roman gods. And if you didn't have that, you could get in trouble. There was something called the Great Persecution under Diocletian. This one was probably the biggest one. Diocletian said you have to give up your sacred texts, so the New Testament, which is being formed. Churches were closed or torn down. Church officials were imprisoned. He also required everyone to sacrifice to the Roman gods. And persecution varies depending on the region. The Great Persecution under Diocletian, a Roman governor in Gaul might not enforce this very strictly. So it depends on where you're at. If you look at slide 43, that's the passage in Tacitus that talks about the Nero's persecution of the Christians, so you can read that. We talked about the Roman Empire splitting. Eventually, Constantine makes Christianity legal in AD 313, and then the Emperor Theodosius makes Christianity the official religion. And basically, you have from that point on, every Roman emperor is Christian except for Julian, which we don't even really talk about much, but the Roman emperors are Christian. They actually closed down a lot of pagan temples and sacrifices. So Christianity kind of goes from this persecuted religion to the preferred religion of the Roman Empire. So that's kind of a quick overview of Christianity. So we're going to start getting into the Middle Ages now.